if we don't have a North Star for those types of things, then you might have enough money, and that's good. But we don't have the meaning that goes with it, and that feels like a bit of a miss to me.
A massive thank you to Casbolt's Motorcycles here at 6 Gaston Street for sponsoring the episode of the 10 Million in 10 Years podcast, authorized dealer of Honda and Ducati motorcycles. Before we get into the episode, I just want to say a big thank you to Tom Hardy for supporting this episode.
Thanks, Dave. I absolutely love what you're doing, and thank you for having me be a part of it.
Tell us a bit about this new sign.
Mate, it's all about the people. I've loved making the move and getting great results for our clients.
Wicked. Let's get into it.
All right. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
We are live.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. We were just talking about the Venn diagram when it comes to a business partnership. Yeah. Do you think the same thing applies to a relationship, like a romantic relationship?
I don't see any reason why it wouldn't apply to any kind of relationship. So the Venn diagram model is if each person represents a circle, or you think of them this way, they're going to be their own individual people, but there has to be some degree of overlap or common ground. And I think that will be true of a business partner. It'll be true of a relationship, intimate or romantic, or a friend, family member, because there has to be something that's going to be shared. And I would probably say that if you're able to communicate effectively with each other, that's probably the best point.
100%.
Having a different value system or a different perspective, I actually don't see that as a big issue. I will have different values from other people. I'll point to my own wife or my business partner or all kinds of people. I think that's kind of a good thing. We get to have a much richer experience because we still have the common ground that we can communicate well with each other. You'd be a prime example of this, David. Our experiences in life would be quite different, but the types of conversations that you and I get to have, incredible, right?
It's been a good success rate so far.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how we communicate with each other, I'd say that's probably the bridge that we need to have built between us so that you can tell me the things about your life that I find so interesting and fascinating and really make me think, and hopefully something in return for that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how a shared contact, past podcast guest Ron Montgomery, has brought us together.
Yeah.
And we've had so many interesting conversations, probably 3 or 4 now.
Yeah.
And each one of them has not disappointed. And so I find that quite fascinating in itself. Like, would we have crossed paths if it wasn't for that shared contact? Who knows?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
We should give credit to Ron, though.
We should give credit to Ron.
He's brought us together.
Yeah.
Ron's a great connector of people.
Yeah,
so.
He is. He really is. We've got a lot of wild conversations under the belt, but maybe we should start off with something conventional and traditional.
Okay.
Dare I might say it.
You want to go with the vanilla flavor?
Well, it's going to be vanilla, but let's just see. So financial planning.
Okay.
Let's talk about that.
All right. What do you want to know? Because I can tell you a bunch of boring stuff, and I can tell you stuff that might be different or unusual.
What are all those letters after your name?
Okay. That's the boring stuff, but I'll talk about it.
I'm curious. I'm a curious person.
Okay. So just different designations and qualifications. I went into finance in 2014, and my understanding at that time of here's what I thought I needed to be successful. I need to become a technical expert. I need to understand investments on a level that nobody else really does. And that's what will help me in my career because I worked at a corporate. I needed to move up the ladder and do a very traditional role. And so when you work for a big corporate in finance in the States, a lot of the times they'll fund those types of things. So the only investment it really required from me was my time and effort. And I was willing to take that. So it's sitting down, getting the materials, opening a book after every day, and then studying for a couple hours. And you do that for a prolonged period of time. And then eventually you learn some stuff, and then they give you some letters that you can tag onto your name. But I decided I wanted to go through it sequentially. So first I became a chartered retirement planning counselor. That's a mouthful of boring words. So retirement planning. Then you go and you become a certified financial planner, which is bigger picture stuff. It's beyond just retirement. Then you get a certified investment management analyst. That's looking at investments. So now how do the investments relate to people's plans for their lives? then you go and you move to another country and you have to do that stuff over again. They can just be designations on their own, and they can be insignificant. I mean, I've met plenty of people who have gone through school before, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of original thought or ideas that come forth from it. It almost seems like they could recite a textbook to you, but could they do anything or adjust their lives? The things that you and I talk about, where you've had experiences and you've learned from them, and you've changed and adapted what you've done to make your life more fruitful, more productive, more meaningful, smarter, having a bigger impact for other people's lives. That's different. So there's the theory and the textbook versus the practice. I didn't just want to be a textbook guy. And as I've gotten older, I've had, I don't know if I'd call it a regret. We'll put a pin in that because we've talked about regret, but I thought technical expertise was what was going to be a differentiator for me. And as I've gotten older, I've figured out that is not true almost at all. So I spent a lot of time studying things and then found out there's actually things that are a lot more important, things that will move the needle better than that. So financial planning, as I've kind of grown through it, was all about numbers and spreadsheets and optimal performance and the efficient frontier and things that nobody wants to hear about. And as I've gotten older, I've figured out, no, that stuff might operate in the background, but nobody really needs to know that. What is a lot more interesting, and where there's more meat on the bone, is you're going to make decisions for your life. What decisions are you going to make? And why? And as basic as that sounds, until we have some kind of foundation and understand that, I'm going to be of limited help. I can build you a portfolio. I can give you investments. But the investments don't say anything about your life and what you want to do. How do you actually want to spend your time as opposed to your money? How do you feel about who you're around and what you're investing in? Not financially, just in terms of your effort. If we don't have a North Star for those types of things, then you might have enough money, and that's good. But we don't have the meaning that goes with it. And that feels like a bit of a miss to me. That's the stuff that's really interesting, is how do you use money in a way that lets you do more of the stuff that you want and less of the stuff that you don't want to do? Because that stuff is going to be in there too. But maybe money's a tool. Use it as a tool. Maybe it's not a tool and it's a treasure. For some people, that's certainly true. Okay? Well, what's it a treasure for? I mean, asking the question of why is simple, but not easy.
Yeah, and I think there's got a lot of layer to it as well. The reason, the question of why, like what is, that could be answered on a surface level, or it could really go down several layers to finding that underlying.
Tell me what you mean by surface level.
Well, I think, the previous episode I did with the guy Aaron Green, that he was the first guest that has a $10 million plus net wealth. And so he asked me directly, I think, on the podcast, like, why do you want this money? And I said, freedom. And we looked around and he points at the cars that he had in this lockup, right? And he's like, do you think this is freedom? This isn't freedom. This is the opposite of freedom. There is a obligation that I have to both like the assets, physical and on paper. Mm-hmm. I've got to look after them. I've got to preserve them, ideally grow them as well. Mm-hmm. It is the opposite of freedom. And I was like, wow, that's interesting.
It can be.
And so it forced me to think a little bit through that question and be like, what does freedom actually mean? And I guess it is similar to what you said before about doing more of the things that I want to be doing, but not necessarily freedom. Like freedom, it's a loaded word as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally is. Well, let me ask you, so when you say freedom, is it freedom from or freedom to?
I guess in my mind at that stage, it was flexibility probably versus freedom. Okay. It was the flexibility to make different choices and to do things that I wanted to be doing.
Okay.
Rather than the opposite of that, which would be to be trapped.
All right. So, stupid question. Why is flexibility important?
I'm not sure. I don't like the idea of being restricted with my time
Okay.
for whatever reason.
Why is time restriction important?
Maybe it's that poster on the wall that we talked about earlier, the 4,000 weeks
Okay.
ticking by. Maybe I'm just really mindful of those weeks and wanting to make them count and to not have regret, which is something else we talked about.
And what does it mean to make them count?
I think to be able to look back on life and be satisfied and grateful of the choices that were made, the experiences had, and to have done things that my future self would be thankful for.
Okay.
And so whether that means doing the hard thing, even if it wasn't easy, or like traveling or being curious, which is another one of my big things. But I think just being able to look back and being content with that, the decisions made.
Okay. So let's get in a time machine really quickly. So we just move forward to the future. You're 80 now,
Yeah.
and you're looking back to your life in this moment. What do you want to see having taken place?
I think it is maybe a little bit cliche, but I would like to have looked back on this stage and felt that I'd reached my potential, that I'd done everything I could to either help as many people, another thing we spoke about earlier, or to have, built the business to a stage that I built it as big as I could.
Okay.
I think having had like quality relationships, that would be another key thing that I would mark as a success. And I think, again, cliche, but like made a positive impact in the community and the world. I think those would be some core things.
Okay. So if we peel back the layers of the onion one more step, why for each one of those? Why impacting people? Why hitting your potential? Why growing the business?
I really don't know how to answer those questions concisely. I think some things I'm not sure. I think you just feel it.
Can I pick at this?
Yeah.
You say,
I'm going to regret this, but yes.
That's okay. You say you don't know how to answer it concisely. Let any thought come to mind. It doesn't have to be concise.
No, I think some things I just feel wired in a certain way, like the whole reaching potential and like making the most of time. Those things tend to underpin the way I think. Yeah. And I'm not sure why. I don't know. Probably childhood trauma. It's usually the answer for everything.
It always goes back.
It always goes back to the head,
age
right?
5 to 9 or something
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, exactly. But I just have this really weird, like burning desire to always want to reach the potential and make the most of time.
Okay.
And I feel when that's not happening, that leads to frustration.
And how do you know what success looks like for those things? So if you're 80, looking back on today, you want to see impact affecting as many people as you can, growing your business.
Yeah.
How do you know when you get there?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think one obvious way would be reaching the 10 million in 10-year goal, which is one measure, but it really doesn't speak to those other elements, right? Around having quality relationships and making the most of time.
Sure.
So, yeah, it's a good thing to put in place.
Well, I mean, let's hypothetical game. So we're out of our time machine now, but now we're in a different machine of imagined worlds. If you had more than enough money, more than you could even imagine. So let's say it's not $10 million, it's $100 million or $1 billion, or doesn't matter. You pick your number, an infinite supply. What would you want to use that money for? Because it sounds like growing the business is one thing, but are you growing the business for the wealth, or is it for reaching your potential or for helping other people? If it's for the wealth and you've already got the wealth, we've ticked that box. So now, what is the purpose behind it?
I think about this a bit in regards to the money side of the challenge, because I think if it was just about the money, then it would be probably possible to make it in easier ways. But it really is about doing it in a way that's fulfilling as well.
Yeah.
That's really important to me.
I'll pull you behind the curtain and let you know this is why it sucks so much, because it sounds like such an innocent question. And how brutal is it? I mean, it's really an investigation of self. And there aren't right or wrong answers with this kind of stuff. But what hopefully this kind of stuff can do for anybody is figuring out what those priorities are on that deep level so that we're moving closer to them. Because the way that the brain works, we've talked a little bit about this, but dopamine, the ultimate drug and driver of basically all human motivation, the way that dopamine works in your brain is it's released to inspire and give motivation. When you create a goal or set something in your mind, there's a dopamine release that takes place there. When you achieve a goal, you usually don't have as big of a dopamine release as when you actually set a goal. So this is kind of interesting. Think about what that means. You're more motivated to create a goal than to actually fulfill it. It's also a lot harder to know if you have fulfilled it unless it's a singular event. If you run a marathon, you know when you're done with the marathon because there's a finish line. You know when you've hit $10 million. When have you impacted people? There's a lot of gray and other colors mixed in that, right? So it's very hard to actually define. And even when it comes down to money, having $10 million, while that is a big chunk of money and it would be sufficient for so many people, there's other things that play in here too. And so even though now the wealth increases, something else plays in, and generally we call it lifestyle creep. And it's the fact that as you earn more and have more, we also spend more. And so I've worked with people who, little old nanas, 75 years old, they've got a couple $1 million and they live off of the pension alone. And they're still saving money off of the pension. So just to be clear, they're not spending very much. They have more money than they could possibly spend. And I'm not saying that lightly. I mean, I've actually challenged them and said, like, let's think about what we want to do with this. And it's very difficult. And part of that is generational. I mean, they were brought up in a different era, more scarcity, frugality was a lot more embraced. But when they're cold in the middle of winter, what they'll do is pull on another woolly jumper. They're not going to turn on the heat pump. And so there's a scarcity mindset that goes along with that. Having enough money is a very different thing of feeling like you have enough money. And it sounds like they're the same. They aren't. There's even been studies that have shown this. This isn't just wild speculation from a guy talking. Studies that show that as people have more wealth, their level of stress with that wealth doesn't decrease. If anything, it stays the same. And a lot of the times it even goes up. Let's go back to dopamine. The reason why that's the case is if you have nothing, it's awful, but you've actually got nothing you can lose either. The way a brain works is we have this thing, a psychological tendency called loss aversion. We feel happy when we gain something, but we feel about 2 to 2.5 times worse when we lose the equivalent. If you gain $10, in order to feel normal again, after a loss, your loss would have only had to be something like $5. $5 is half of 10. So if you lost 5, you'd have to gain 10 just to feel emotionally equivalent. That's very bizarre.
That is bizarre.
So now, once you've actually got wealth and you've built that up, you're not just thinking about it as, cool, I'm sweet, I'll relax now. Now what you're afraid of is losing it. So that level of stress goes up, not even necessarily proportionately, sometimes even more, because once you've got it, you want to protect it. Parents might be able to relate to this. I mean, you've got a daughter. It's very hard to feel protective over your child if your child isn't in the world. If you haven't had a child yet, it's hard to feel a sense of connection with your kid. But once your kid is here, is it fair to say that you feel connected to your kid?
Of course.
Not to say that kids are the same thing as money and portfolios, but the idea is that there's an emotional bond that takes place with these things. So emotions and numbers don't mix really well.
Yeah, I guess that's similar to what Aaron Green was referencing regarding the net wealth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's bizarre, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, I kind of can relate to it though. Like I understand it from a a standpoint of the more things that you have, the more you have to lose. So that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And I think not necessarily even on a physical level, like on an emotional level or a value level of connections. Like it would suck. And I guess like being in Auckland recently, when I didn't have the same level of connections and community that I do in Christchurch, it was horrible. I felt alone, and I felt like this is like going back several steps. And so it was interesting to experience that.
Was it similar to another time when you had felt that?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. It was like being in a new city and it was almost like I say, being back several years in progress.
Yeah.
So an interesting contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So grateful for that opportunity.
And it sounds like you've certainly walked away with some kind of learning or lesson from that too, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think the lesson was that, A, not to take for granted what you do have.
Yeah.
And B, also to keep nurturing, keep growing, keep fostering that community.
Yeah.
Because it is of value. And in a lot of ways, both emotionally, financially.
Okay.
In a variety of ways.
So that might be something to think about over time as well, is as you're moving towards achieving what you want to achieve, again, you can use your money in any way that you want. So how you want to use it is up to you. You're the boss. That's where you always want to think of, well, then what do I want to do with it? And freedom is a very important thing. We've talked about freedom before, but freedom is a nice concept, and it can be really, really crippling. And I'm not about to go in favor of some dictatorial, authoritative, horrible situation. What I mean is that freedom means that now all the responsibility lies on the individual. When you have to make choices, you have to make choices. And that's very good if you're comfortable to make choices. But I think we talked about the entrepreneur's dilemma. You have to make every choice for your business, which means when you do really well, you get a lot of credit for it. But when you don't do well, you also get the blame. And that's a hard reality, right?
Yeah, it's a responsibility, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah, both from a time and money perspective.
So how do you deal with that responsibility?
Wouldn't say I've nailed it, but I try to operate in different time zones. So like I try to consider the day ahead, the week ahead, the month ahead, the year ahead. And I find by oscillating between these different time frames, I find that helpful.
Okay.
I find it useful to allocate certain goals to certain time frames. So like I'd love to be able to learn speak Spanish, for example.
Okay.
I know that's not going to happen next week, and it's probably not going to happen next year.
Okay.
But I know that I want to do it sometime in the future. And so it gives me peace of mind knowing that approximately in the next 3 to 4 years, I'll start learning and taking that, I'll allocate sufficient time in roughly that time frame.
What made you decide Spanish?
I've tried learning it several times. When I lived in Canada, we traveled to Mexico quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so I would attempt the Duolingo thing. I would try the class thing. I'd try like reading books thing. I'd try the whole works, right? But it just never quite sunk. So I'm keen to tick it off.
So you've got a history with Spanish. You've tangoed before.
I've tried to learn a few words here and there.
Yeah.
Let's go that far.
Good for you, man.
Yeah. So, I think just back to the original question though, around time and like managing it, I just find like that's really helped me personally.
Okay.
By choosing different time frames.
If you were going to explain that to somebody else, what would you say? So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to use the system, the David system for time allocation. Can you teach me how to do that? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the essence of a lot of the coaching sessions, the business coaching sessions, is just allocating sufficient time to each task and like putting it on the calendar. So, say it's growing the business to X point, like what are the steps to get there? And then just breaking that down, I find that it sounds so simple, but yet how practical.
Why is it?
I'm not sure. I think a lot of us have dreams and visions of what we want to do, but maybe it's just helpful to have some, approximate plan that can help just provide a roadmap. I think that's like something that is overlooked. I think if you can break down any goal into really bite-sized pieces, again, simple as that sounds, I think it just can give us peace of mind that we're taking the right steps. But like running a race, like a marathon, having that training plan that's broken down into what are you going to do every like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Like what does that look like?
Yeah.
Is it a 5K tomorrow? Like what do we have to do? I think by having that plan in place, it gives us peace of mind.
Simple but not easy.
Simple but not easy, exactly. Like when it's raining outside and your training plan, it's got a run specified. Imagine that.
Yep. I can imagine.
You could, yeah.
I can imagine that very well.
You could imagine that.
Waking up and thinking it's raining and saying, I'm not going to run today. And
imagine that.
Talking over a podcast. I can see it so clearly.
So clearly. But I think, running or business or learning a language, I think it's all much the same. Like if you've got the end goal in mind, if you can work backwards, reverse engineer it. I think a lot of the times we all know what we need to do to get where we want to go. For the most part.
Sure.
And what I mean is like a lot of the people that I come into contact with, they're not attempting to cure cancer or do something that's radically foreign or hasn't been done before. Mm-hmm. Right? And so I think that it's relatively achievable if we put in the right steps to get to that goal.
It reminds me of the phrase of a business plan's not worth the paper that it's printed on, but the planning process is invaluable. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. You're planning it out. Hey, here's the point B or point Z that we want to get to, whatever point it is. And now we're going to work backwards and we're just going to start to slice these up into manageable bite-sized pieces. And then you have a meal along the way.
Yeah. And we're going to check in regularly to make sure that we're still on track. It's similar to the personal training sessions I have every week.
Yeah.
It's not the actual time in the gym that's of value, although that's still good.
Sure.
It's more that feeling of, coming up to Thursday and being like, Friday, and me knowing full well the trainer's going to ask, how's the week been? Have you gotten into the gym? How's the diet been? And so I think that's really what I'm looking for. It's that
accountability.
It's that accountability that, if it's Tuesday afternoon and there's been no gym workouts done yet, I better get going. I've got to make this happen, right?
You're gonna have some little guilt monster.
Well, yeah, like I don't want to come to Friday and have to disappoint myself and the trainer and be like, you know what, I've got so many reasons why I didn't make it to the gym.
Sure.
But I didn't make it to the gym.
Yeah.
And I've eaten not very well.
So the reasons are irrelevant. It's the result that's actually what determines it.
I think it's the action steps. Yeah. It's the process of doing what you say you're going to do.
And so it sounds like having some kind of personal trainer is that step. So what you are as a business coach and holding somebody's hand, making sure that they can go from A to B and B to C and do the next thing, whatever the next thing is, it just makes it easier. In the same way that a personal trainer makes sure that you're accountable to yourself, you're doing the workouts, you're taking the steps necessary so that you can be healthy in the way that you want to be or in the way that you envision. I mean, is that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely similarities. I think probably the difference would be that the personal trainer, I guess, is pushing you physically, whereas as a business coach, I'm questioning, are you capable of more? Have you set this goal too low? Could you be doing more, or is this the right goal?
Sure.
Right. I think just having that third party that's neutral yet supportive, I think that's something that does have value, and that's why I personally invest in business coaching myself. Is because that I know I'm not I'm not immune to these challenges that the clients have.
Totally. That's actually one of the questions that I think it's undervalued is this a goal that's worth doing? I mean, it can sound almost degrading in some ways, but it's really worth pausing before you start going off a direction. Are you going the right direction? I mean, I'm not a pilot. Let me make that clear as a disclaimer. But in flying and as a pilot, there's some concept called the 60-1-1 rule, which is if you're 1 degree off when you start your flight, after 60 miles or 60 Ks of flying, you were going to be 1 mile or 1K off where you should be. And it's the idea of if you just calibrate a little bit better, then you're not missing out on that extra mile or extra K that you need to make up in terms of ground. That's great in theory, but also it sounds like even if you are off, still having a coach or a trainer is somebody that helps make sure that you're staying as close to that path or that track as possible. I mean, is that actually fair?
Yeah, I love that analogy. It's really easy to comprehend being a visual person like myself, and I've done a bit of flying as well, so I can kind of...
Have you really?
I can, yeah.
Daredevil.
So that's actually on the list before learning Spanish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the finish the pilot license and then Spanish. That's the sequence, because I wouldn't want to do those two things at the same time. It's too much.
So is this going to be something so that you can come over the sound system and give it a whole speech in Spanish and say,
oh man, imagine that. Imagine
Hola.
Both at the same
Mi
time.
nombre David. Is that
Exactly
what it's going to turn into?
Yeah, that's going to...
International pilot?
That's going to be the merger, yeah. But yeah, I love the analogy of the flight and being either on or off course. It's really... it's a cool analogy, right? Like, so if you're flying from here to Auckland, say, like that few degrees off and realigning, re-navigating. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really...
I hope that there's some kind of comfort in it. And I need this too. I think everybody does. If you can get your direction better from the get-go, you save yourself some time and effort later on. Even if you do get off track, though, it's okay. Nobody is perfectly on track all of the time anyway. At least in the financial realm, it would be impossible to maintain your numbers perfectly. They're going to change second to second, minute to minute. That's understandable. So as long as we don't deviate too far off path, we always know that we're within range. I mean, a path is wide. It's not just designed, as a single footstep and very narrow. There's some wiggle room between there. And I think that gives a little bit of, hopefully de-stresses it, because so many people get stressed out about their finances, right? I mean, it's not a comfortable thing to talk about for most people. If you start talking about values and goals and what people want to do, that's an uncomfortable conversation. Now throw in a mortgage, savings, investment decisions, money mistakes. I mean, you're looking at a soup that's just every ingredient is regret and shame and embarrassment. So a lot of people don't want to talk about it, and it becomes very easy to avoid. And when you're avoiding it, it's harder to make sure that you're actually on the right path, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so I think of it as financial planning, to answer your question from a while back, very similar to those things. It's helping understand, hey, what is the vision? What do we want to do? What are we going towards? Once we know that, we can start to put some numbers in place. And the numbers are pretty straightforward. We can do those calculations in basically seconds and then figure out, okay, well, here's what the base case looks like. But what else do you want to do? What if things go worse than we expect? What if they go better than we expect? Plan A, plan B, plan C. And then at the end of that, there's going to be all kinds of different investments that will actually allow for it. I can give you what I see as quantitatively the best option. But the other thing about finance is, like I said, you don't have to be perfect. You can actually be okay financially. A lot of people, even with making a bunch of bad decisions, it just means that you have to offset that somewhere else. Life is all about trade-offs. I mean, another word for that might be compromise, but you could save a whole bunch more money and then never make a smart investment decision with it, and you would actually have enough. That solution works. The flip side of that might be the entrepreneur who basically is poor up until the age of like 35, and then they sell their tech company for a couple $1 billion, and now they're a high net worth individual. There's all these different ways of going about it. So for one of my critiques of a lot of advice is that it's almost made to sound like there's one really good, true way of doing it, and everything else is just inferior. I mean, there might be a best way, but to be fair, it's just, if you don't have to stick to that one way, why would you? And here's a good example. 3 tennis players, some of the greatest tennis players of all time: Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer. When you see these guys play, Nadal gets on the court and he's so intense. He's like screaming and hyping himself up. He's hitting the ball as hard as he can, like sprinting just in the warm up. I mean, this guy, you look at him and you're like, man, you calm down for like a second, you know? He's dialed in and he's really going for it. And it's visible that that's what's going on. Phenomenal tennis player. Then you've got Djokovic, a guy who almost won't say a single word. He's quiet, he's reserved, he's internalizing everything. He just doesn't display emotion. He's almost a statue that can move really well. And then you've got Federer. The guy's like laughing and doing trick shots all the time. He's hitting it between his legs. He's giving high fives to friends around the court. He's having a whole bunch of fun. Those are 3 of the best tennis players of all time. Very different personalities and types, but yet they're all still 3 of the best. How does that happen? It's the idea that there isn't one way of doing everything. There's multiple ways. So when you hear something financially as, oh, this is the way to do it, chances are there's a sales line coming after that. And in reality, there's multiple ways of doing it. You just kind of have to have the right information, and then you can customize it.
Yeah, I guess finding the way that is aligned with your own personality and your own self. I think that's sort of what I've discovered recently is like, if you're trying to be what other people are, then it doesn't usually end well. Whereas if you're able to like reflect inward a little bit and sort of know what you enjoy and what your strengths are, I find that that will be a much better way to lean into a problem. Or, you know, there's no shortage of advice out there, right? When it comes to anything,
Totally.
business, investing, finance.
Yeah.
And so we've determined that there's various different paths to get to similar goals, right?
Yeah.
But I think doing what's, I guess it's just trying to find what is aligned with yourself.
So how do people find that? What is aligned with their
Well, it's a really good
style?
question. I think I've always been a curious person. Like I've always been curious around. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that helps because it helps explore options, helps find what does resonate most to myself.
What are you most curious about?
I get really quite curious around what makes other people tick.
Okay. What do you mean? Like, as in what they're interested in?
Yeah,
what
like
irritates them?
yeah,
What they
yeah. Just like what's this story, right? Especially if they are an outlier, right? Like
What's going on behind the eyes?
yeah, a little bit, right? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, not for everyone, but you know,
Yeah.
for a lot of people, that's sort of a curiosity of mine.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you curious?
I think so.
Yeah.
I believe I am. Maybe I have to explore that. Curiously find out if I'm more curious.
You mentioned that you listen to, say, podcasts, not so much on dry analytical
Sure.
financial planning type content, but more
Yeah.
around psychology. So that would indicate to me that you are curious, because I think psychology is that is curiosity.
I think so. I mean, I'd be biased, but yeah, I think that I've heard it explained from a financial point of view. A guy named Morgan Housel talks about it, where a person's experience with money will make up 15 more zeros, 1% of the total world's experience with money. So your experience, my experience, it means nothing in the grand scheme of things. But how we think about money our experiences probably determine 95, 99% of how we make decisions. That's interesting. Everybody's experience will shape their points of view and what they're going to enjoy, what they're going to want to do, what their nature and natural inclination is going to be. So moving in a way that is more natural can help facilitate that. But I suppose that's also a potential fear of stagnation. If I'm only playing into what I feel comfortable doing or what I'm naturally inclined to do, am I avoiding things that I find difficult? Do I not want to go for my run this morning because it's raining and I feel like that's a valid excuse to be lazy? Maybe, but maybe then I never run again either. So I suppose psychology is really where there's a lot of explanation there, but there's also a lot of mystery that remains. That's the way I'm thinking about it. So, yeah, I guess you're right. I am quite a curious person.
You're very curious. Yeah, I would classify you as a very curious person.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Your line of questions are not surface level questions. They're very
Okay.
thoughtful questions.
Huh. But
And
does
that-
that mean curiosity, or does that just mean
I think so.
obstinance?
It could. I don't even know what that means.
Bullheaded.
Ah, yeah, maybe.
Just too dumb to know any better.
I'm unsure. I don't know about that one.
Huh. Yeah. Well, I think curiosity is something where it's a doorway. Or it's maybe even multiple doorways. You can open it up and go any which direction that you want from it. It's really, you become the master of your own destiny. But if you're not curious, you are probably not getting in quite as much information as you otherwise could. That may not actually be a problem at all, but if what you want to do is learn or develop or grow or understand more about the world around you, if you want to know what makes people tick, I think curiosity is going to be an important ingredient in that recipe.
I think so.
But I could be wrong, and I would like to hear about that.
When you are running or making a decision to run or not run,
Yeah.
what gets in your way when you decide not to run? Just out of curiosity.
It's almost always weather.
Is it the discomfort though? Is it the inconvenience?
No. I've gotten used to that part of it. So going for a run for 2 hours or something like that, my body's used to that. It's part of my schedule anyway. That part is normal and comfortable. Really, it has to be something else where I just don't like some aspect of it. And usually that's related to the weather, because getting changed into running clothes when it's 2 degrees outside, I hate that. Or when it's running and I'm just going to feel the water beating on my face and make me super cold. And then it's going to start to stick to me and I'm going to have to go and try to take off my clothes for like 15 minutes when I get home. Those are things that I just, for some reason, I haven't parsed this out from my own psychology, but it's just too irritating for me to deal with.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself doing regular hard things? Like, do you find parts of your work, your business hard?
Yeah. And I think that's a good indication that it's something that needs to be leaned into more. So going for a run, it's difficult. Okay, then I should probably do this, because teaching myself that I can do things that are difficult is going to be a useful habit to get used to. Work-wise, there might be a few different examples, because there's different aspects of what it means to work. I'm saying work because it doesn't feel like work to me. I mean, I'm a very lucky guy. I get to talk to people for a living. That's what I do. If I'm doing some kind of analysis, I have training in that. I'm very comfortable with it. I'm going to talk about it with my business partner. We're going to throw ideas around and then figure out, does this make sense? Does this make as much sense as anything else possibly could? Okay, cool. So you iron out the analysis and you get used to that. And it's a lot of fun. If I'm talking with somebody, I have to make sure that I'm curious and understand as much as I can that's relevant about them. And the reason I say that is because I'll use the example. If you go to a doctor's office and they've already got a prescription written out for you before you've even talked to them or stepped into the room, how does that feel?
It's a red flag.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good, right?
No, that's not good.
Personally, I probably want to have at least a few words with them to make sure that they're actually diagnosing what it is that's going on with me. And they're a medical professional. They have years of training and experience. They have big brains. They probably know, hey, if you've got these symptoms or conditions, this is probably what you need. Okay, great. But nonetheless, there might be some other information that's going to change that diagnosis. So if I'm going to talk to somebody, I have to be curious to really make sure that I'm understanding what's relevant about them, because that's going to form the plan. Analysis, talking to somebody, making sure that we're going through a strategy. Yeah, I'm not sure I find that an uphill battle. It requires work, but I enjoy it at the same time. It feels good. So I think it's a comfortable flow state. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I just ask about that because it's something I've been experimenting with recently about doing the hard thing, about doing, say, cold plunging, for example.
Okay.
I don't find that easy at all. I find it very hard.
Yes.
But yet,
Agreed.
I'm pushing myself to follow through and to do it.
Okay.
And I use the Atomic Habits model, which is to start with a very small minimum level, and then work up from there.
Okay.
Which is something that I use to get my head around it.
Yep.
Meaning, like with the cold plunge, it's like, all right, I've just got to get in there. That's all I got to do. And then when I'm in there, it's like, okay, can I do 10 seconds? Yeah, I can probably do 10 seconds. It's all right. Should we just round it up to 30 seconds? Right?
Yep.
But worst case scenario, I've got in there. That's the number one objective.
So how are you finding it so far?
Yeah, not good.
Building that habit.
No, not good at all.
Okay.
I'm really off track for some reason. I used to, a few months ago, I was in a fairly good cadence with it, and I was able to cold plunge for way longer. And whether this is success or not success, but I just found that I was getting a lot more acclimatized to it.
Okay.
Whereas recently, not so much. I found it really difficult, and I'm really having to force myself to get in there.
Any idea what's going on?
I'm not sure. Maybe it's winter. It is winter. That's not a question.
Fact. Winter.
Fact. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe it's the fact that I'm not doing enough of it. And so therefore I'm not getting into a state of comfort with it.
Like there's a hurdle point, a minimum amount.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, that's one theory. That's probably quite likely.
Are you finding any of the benefits from it?
Hard to say. I find that it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what's contributing to, good mood.
Sure.
The Elliott list, we're going to call it. That's a latest thing that I've been working on. Elliott list, yes.
Okay.
He sits over there. So he comes up with this checklist of things that if you're not feeling optimal, you work your way through the list. So it's like, have I exercised today? Have I cold plunged? Have I saunaed? Have I read? Have I journaled? Have I had some uplifting conversations? How's my diet been? Have I had alcohol? And just working through this whole checklist. I've had a shitty sleep. That's it. That's the problem. And so it just helps identify low mood or, frustrations or anything like that. But to isolate something to cold plunging or not cold plunging,
sure,
I just find it really difficult to isolate those types of things.
That's a genius concept, an Elliott list.
The Elliott list.
Do you have one on your
I do.
computers now? Or
Yeah, it's called the Elliott list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's genius. I'm going to adopt that.
Oh, man, I think a lot of people should and could do this. I think that it would automatically eradicate a lot of the world's problems.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, really simple list.
I would probably add hunger onto it as well.
Hunger, yeah, for sure.
Because when I get hungry, it turns into more of hangry, and I just need a snack. I'm just nothing but a little kid who just needs something to nibble on, and then I'm fine again.
Are you a big snacker then?
I'm a big eater.
You're a big eater?
Yeah.
So with snacks, do you buy snacks?
Not generally, no.
No.
I
neither.
mean, it's usually just homemade meals and then there's leftovers or something like that and fruit and veg, but which makes it sound like I'm healthier than I am. I'm not actually a health nut. It's just something where if I'm going to be eating something and it's already easy and made well, I'm happy to just do it that way. But you are quite a healthy guy. You're quite conscientious in what you do.
Somewhat. Yeah, I guess somewhat. You know, I try to eat, largely whole foods. I try to exercise.
Has that always been the case? Or is this a new...
No, it was around 3 years ago, and I was coming up to a birthday, which is often a good time to reflect.
Yeah.
And I started on a journey of health of sorts. Like I started running a bit more, going to the gym more, started paying attention to nutrition, started drinking less. And so a whole bunch of things started happening. But I'm just sort of finding my way. Like as I mentioned, I got the weekly PT. I've just recently, I was going to say completed 75 hard, but I didn't quite finish it. So that was a really good reset. I did about 70 days of that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I try. I do try. I find that when I'm eating better and not eating, I don't really like processed stuff anyway, but I find that the better I eat, the better I feel. And so there's that direct correlation.
What knocks you off track when you are eating well and causes you to not eat well?
I mean, this recent trip, there was a little bit of alcohol consumed here and there, which in turn affected sleep. And then I also wasn't probably eating optimally. I think like when traveling, it's not as easy to stay in those same routines. But yeah, generally pretty good. Yeah, I'm generally pretty content with that.
And do you feel like your eating habits have continued to improve since a few years ago?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've generally gotten better and better. And whether that's, nutritionally accurate, I'm not sure, but
it feels better.
I feel like I'm decent. Yeah.
So
I'm good enough.
Yeah. Even if you're not, hey, David, you are good enough, by the way, man. I just want to say that, okay? Hopefully that comes across. But even if you aren't actually eating sufficiently in the way that you want to, you feel as though you are. So there could be some kind of placebo.
Yeah.
And so you're probably getting a lot of the benefit from it anyway.
I think so. It's an interesting one. Like I used to say like McDonald's, right? Like I used to see that as like not a treat, but I'd drive by and be like, oh yeah, like look at that burger. Whereas now I have like a negative association with that, right? Like I see that and be like, it's probably not going to make me feel very good.
Sure.
That's probably not like the highest grade type food I could have.
So how is that switch?
Well,
how does that happen?
I guess just over the course of, a few years of shifting habits,
okay.
I've linked, say, clean eating and whole foods to feeling better and better fuel and having a better outcome. So it's changed that link and association between like, say fast food or processed food or something that's probably not great, but maybe pleasurable in the moment.
Sure.
So that's been an interesting
a dopamine spike.
Observation. Yeah, I guess it is a form of dopamine or some kind of chemical.
So what are the other ways that you feel like you've also improved on your health then?
I think lifting weights has been a big thing. That's really helped with just the way I feel about myself. I think that's been good. It's been good for confidence. It's been good for I feel like it's had a lot of positive flow-on effects, like the way that I feel after lifting weights. And when I'm in a good routine of going to the gym, feels like that leads on to better sleep, better food choices. It's a good catalyst. It's a good starting point. And part of that is the PT. Part of that is just getting into that rhythm. Part of it's the app that I use. It's a really easy app to track, and it's easy to register the weights. And so it's easy to be like, oh yeah, I could just like lift one more rep and then that's a PB, or like it'll give you a trophy. And so it's added a level of gamification to the process.
So it's become a virtual cycle. The eating, the lifestyle, the working out, the entering it into an app,
yeah,
PT, all of this.
Yeah, totally.
So question for you, if you were in a position where you had enough resources and wealth,
Yeah.
how would you change your health habits then?
If there was unlimited wealth, I'd probably have I'd definitely have a chef. I'd have a private chef, and I would have prepared meals, and I'd have just better, there'd just be better planning in place.
Sure.
Yeah. It wouldn't be radically different though, I don't think. Like, I don't think I'd eat radically different. Maybe it'd be a bit fancier and a bit more interesting, but
Sure.
I think it'd be largely, the whole foods, right? Like, I look at a lot of the food and menu items at IHF/Elements. It would be that type of food, right?
Yep.
Largely good, like 80-90% good, just really tasty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So using resources towards improving your health, sounds like that would be something that's important or valuable then, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Is that something that you feel like over time you'll shift more towards?
I think so, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I've already started, I've already started to prioritize that. Just, buying better meats and like buying food that's better, essentially. Yeah. And I think that's probably a good way to spend money or invest money. So yeah, I think it's actually a good goal to have for the next couple of years, is to continue that process. I think that would be wise. I think that would be aligned with my priorities.
Perfect. Any food weaknesses?
I mean,
guilty pleasures?
No, I mean, yes and no, right? Like, I love sweet treats and like I love stuff like that, but also not really, like I can also take it or leave it.
Really?
Yeah.
So you've got the willpower where you can actually just refuse it.
If it's right there in front of me, that's very hard. But, if it's a process of having to buy it, then that's another layer of difficulty, right?
So the Atomic Habits, you've designed your environment so that you don't have sweets around to avoid eating them.
Oh yeah, because if it's there, I have zero willpower. And that's part of being on like the 75 hard challenges, right? It's just so much easier for me to have that binary, nope, it's not on the list, so I can't have it. What else have you
done to design your environment for other parts of your life? So even beyond, say, healthy eating, what else are you doing that facilitates doing the things that you want to do?
I guess like having the nice gym membership, I find that is just a lot easier to get in there. If it's a nice environment and there's nice amenities, I find that's a lot easier than to say go to like a dirty, dingy, low lit gym, right? Like that's just not going to be aspirational. That's not going to get me out of bed.
Whereas if upgraded.
Whereas if I know I can go in there, hey, I can have a coffee to start with, probably run into some cool people, and shit, I'm here. I may as well lift some weights.
Yeah.
That's sort of how I work. So
that's quite an interesting way of going about it. So, I mean, it sounds like you've crafted your life, pulling on different elements and doing things, no pun intended, but figuring out ways that you can do things that help serve a purpose of more of what you're trying to do. So going to the gym puts you in touch with interesting people, great conversations, which is part of the Elliott list. Then you're also going to lift some weights, which is part of your health and PT plan anyway. You'll be there. You'll be exposed to good food that you'll be eating, and you're less likely to be snacking on unhealthy stuff anyway. And all of that serving the purpose of building the business so that you can have an impact on people, so that you can live more comfortably and actually enjoy what you're doing, as opposed to working a job that you don't find as meaningful or don't get satisfaction out of.
Totally. Great summary. Yeah.
Perfect.
That's it.
Well, that's a pretty good way to go, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's why I'm like overall really happy with how things are going at the moment.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool to have, looked back at say 4 years ago. And I mean, it's overall, it's really good. Like I'm excited for what the next few years are going to look like.
Do you think there's anything you could have told yourself from 3 to 4 years ago or before that? So before you started on the journey that you're on now.
Yeah.
Is there any combination of words you could have given yourself that would have unlocked that motivation? It'd have given a dopamine release where David 2.0 emerges even earlier?
It's hard to say. It's really hard to tell what those magic words would have been.
How long is a piece of string?
Yeah. I mean, I think, like I was going to say, just trust your gut, like trust my gut feelings on things. Like if something's not really sitting right, or if there's, if something's like, there's two different things, and I want to delineate between this. Like doing hard things like a cold plunge is one thing, but I think either working with or like being in the company of somebody or a business or whatever that's not aligned, like, and it is friction and it's just difficult and it's not good, that's different.
What do you mean?
So I guess like in business, like not all customers are created equally. And whether that's through alignment or for whatever reason, but we all know what that's like, right? If you're butting heads, it's just not a good experience for whatever reason.
Yep.
I would really encourage my former self to just discard that type of either customer, supplier, partner, whatever, employee, anything like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And just be really ruthless and mindful with that.
Yep.
Yeah. That would be the big thing.
So not being too open in your interpretation of doing hard things and thinking, oh, well, that means work with difficult people. Have a line that separates it where you can do hard things. But when it comes to your business, if you're working with somebody who you don't have the same interests as them, and I don't mean interests in terms of what you do personally, but the way that you operate as a business is not quite right for them or vice versa, they're not actually who you're meant to be working with. Do hard things in other ways in your life that you have more control over.
Exactly.
It's more relevant to David and knowing, hey, this is something you can do. You have control over it. There's not an external factor there.
Yeah. Yeah. Same with friends as well, right? Like if friends are hard work and they're just, not aligned. Again, alignment, this word keeps coming up time and time again, but
Yeah.
I find like if you're not aligned to something or someone, that's the big thing I would say to my previous self would be ensure that there's alignment for whatever that means.
I'm with you there. I think we've talked about it before, but if you think about the relationships in your life, it's not going to be true for everybody, but for most people, you'll probably be closest with and enjoy your time with people that you've known for longer. So very rarely does somebody have their whole best friend in the entire world is somebody that they met 2 months ago. A lot of the times, the person that they feel closest to, they've met years or decades ago. And in the world of finance, people talk about compound interest. But what about compounding relationships or compounding knowledge and information? That's real too. Your experience with somebody will continue to rise and get better and better and better over time if you know them longer and you invest in that relationship. If you're not aligned with somebody and it's not a good relationship, effectively what you're doing is capping how much growth in good experience that you can have with somebody. So while it can sound very harsh, it's also something you're actually underselling yourself when you do that. You're not giving yourself as much value as you could or as much happiness and connection with another person. So it's probably worth evaluating in terms of who you spend your time with. Not to you, I mean just in general. For myself, just thinking, well, if I'm going to spend time, I want to make sure I add value to somebody else's life. And I also want to make sure that selfishly, I enjoyed the time that I spend with them too.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's another one of those concepts that comes up a lot, either in the podcast, in coaching sessions, in conversations, is that whole theory of who you spend time with, the 5 people theory.
Yeah.
It's definitely not new, but it keeps coming up.
There's probably a reason for that, right?
I believe so, yeah. And so you can either, up-level that list of 5 people, or you can stay the same. And I don't know, I find it quite interesting and fun to look for new people to meet, to like get around,
You are a curious person.
Yeah, I guess, there's, how many people are there here in the world? Like 7 billion, 8 billion?
Now.
8. Yeah, so that's a lot of people. A lot of people. An unfathomable amount. You know, so like I just
That's a lot of hands to shake and people to make friends with.
yeah, exactly. And so I just don't personally find the need to stay in the same circle if there's any reason not to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're a value creation machine.
I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, in a lot of sense, that's the idea is you bring value to somebody else's life and they bring value to yours. And that's not, again, it's not just numbers. It's also emotionally or mentally or intellectually or whatever it might be. Why not find the synergies where more value is being created?
Totally. Yeah. 100%. I love that. It's probably a good way to wrap it up.
I'd say so. This has been a lot of fun.
It's always a lot of fun.
It really is.
Some really, really interesting chats we've had. And I look forward to continuing them.
Likewise. Yeah, me too.
If someone wants to learn more about you, Cameron, what's the best place to go? LinkedIn or a website or?
Oh, good question. Probably just our website.
Website, yeah, cool.
IrvineWinborn.com
Okay.
or .co.nz.
Yep.
I know our website. We are on LinkedIn also, but yeah, we're out there.
We're out there.
A Google.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
It's been fun. A lot of fun. Thank you.